They assumed I was poor the moment I walked in, wearing my old brown coat. I saw it in their eyes, the quick silent scan from the frayed cuffs to the missing top button. My daughter-in-law leaned toward the waiter, whispering, "Just let her sit quietly. She's not used to places like this." She didn't know I heard. But the worst part wasn't her whisper or the judging eyes around the table. The worst part was Daniel, my own son, pretending not to notice me, pretending I wasn't his mother. They had no idea who I really was. Not yet. I took a slow breath as I stepped fully into the warm, dimly lit interior of Rowan and Finch, the most expensive restaurant in our part of the Midwest. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen rain above the dining room, catching bits of light and flinging them across polished tables. The air smelled of butter, seared steak, and the kind of wine people bragged about instead of enjoying. Everything was meant to impress, and it did, just not in the way they'd hoped. My coat, a soft, worn wool Tom bought me 35 years ago, felt suddenly heavier on my shoulders. Not from shame, never shame, just memory. Tom's laughter, his hands on mine. A winter afternoon when we had no money but so much love we didn't feel cold. This coat was the last gift he ever gave me, and though the sleeves were thinning and the pocket lining had torn, I wore it every winter like a promise. But to them tonight it was a verdict. Olivia's mother, Carol Hayes, spotted me from across the room. Even from that distance, I saw the faint tightening at the corner of her mouth, a tiny, elegant wince, before she smoothed it into a courteous smile. She was dressed in cream silk with diamonds dripping from her ears, her blonde hair swept into a perfect updo. Next to her sat Richard, her husband, a man who wore his success like cologne. Tailored navy suit, heavy gold watch, the kind of posture that said, "I built something and I need the world to know." And then there was my son Daniel sitting straight-backed between them, like he belonged more to their world than mine. He looked at me just for a second, but then looked away, as if embarrassed to be caught doing it. He didn't always avoid my eyes like that. Once he used to run to me with scraped knees and stories from school. Once he used to hug me so tightly his little arms would shake. But adulthood, marriage, and the Hayes family's polished influence had slowly built a quiet distance. Not cruel, not intentional, just growing. I walked toward the table, ignoring the way the maitre d' subtly slowed his step as he noticed my coat. I wasn't surprised. Rowan and Finch was used to cashmere and mink, not wool gone soft with time. "Hi, Mom," Daniel said finally, standing halfway up like he wasn't sure if fully standing would look strange in front of his in-laws. "Hello, sweetheart," I answered gently. Olivia offered a tight smile, brushing non-existent crumbs off her silky green dress. "Helen," she said, voice bright but strained. "Glad you could make it." Glad. Right. I knew Olivia. She wasn't cruel. She was raised in a world where appearances mattered more than intentions. Her parents had shaped her that way. A world where you judged people by their clothes, their car, their address. A world where a teacher like me, retired, modest, happy, was considered background noise in someone else's symphony. A server pulled out chairs for everyone else, bowed, slightly, smiled politely. But when I reached my place, he hesitated, glancing at Olivia. She shook her head. "She's fine," she whispered. "She can seat herself." The words were soft, but they cracked something inside me. I sat slowly, smoothing my coat across my lap. "Traffic okay?" Daniel asked, eyes darting between me and the menu, like he was afraid I might say something embarrassing. "Oh, yes," I replied. I took my usual route. Carol laughed lightly. "Still living in that little brown house, Helen, I told Olivia, you must get cold in the winters there." I smiled. "It's cozy. I like it." Carol tilted her head the way people do when pretending to admire something they secretly pity. "Well, comfort is important at your age." "At your age?" People say it like a diagnosis. The waiter brought wine, something French I couldn't pronounce, but the Hayes drank it with practiced ease. I lifted my glass mostly to feel the warmth in my hands. Olivia cleared her throat. "We're glad you joined us tonight. This dinner is, well, a bit fancy. I know it's different from what you're used to." I blinked slowly. Different can be nice. "Of course," she said quickly, cheeks flushing. Conversation drifted to investments theirs, vacations theirs, and plans for Daniel's next promotion. They talked as if life were a ladder, and every rung held a price tag. I listened quietly. I always listened. It's something teachers know how to do, read the room, sense the unsaid. What was unsaid tonight was simple. They didn't want me to belong. Carol leaned toward Richard, murmuring something behind her napkin. He nodded. Olivia gave a tight smile. Daniel kept his eyes on the table. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push back. I just folded my hands and waited. Because if there's one thing life has taught me, it's this. People reveal themselves eventually, especially when they think you have nothing. And tonight, they thought I had nothing. They were wrong. I didn't always sit quietly at tables where people assumed I didn't belong. There was a time long ago when I spoke loudly, laughed loudly, lived loudly. But life has a way of sanding us down until only the essentials remain. And the essentials, at least for me, were simple love work and the small promises we keep to the people we cherish. After Tom passed, the world seemed to squeeze in around me. He'd been gone 15 years now, but sometimes it still felt like yesterday, a silent ache in the chest, like a bruise I kept pressing. Daniel had been 10, still small enough to wrap both arms around my waist, but old enough to see the way my shoulders shook when I thought he wasn't looking. I went back to teaching 2 weeks after the funeral because grief doesn't pay bills and loneliness doesn't pack lunchboxes. I stood in front of a classroom full of fourth graders with shaky hands and a voice that cracked every time I said, "Good morning, class." Chalk dust clung to my dress. The scent of tempera paint and old textbooks stayed with me long after I left the school building. I was never rich, but I was never empty either. Every month after paying the mortgage on our little brown house and buying groceries, I put away whatever pennies were left, literally pennies sometimes. It wasn't much, but it was something. And when you grow up poor, something feels like everything. My neighbor, Mr. Donnelly, owned a small corner store with uneven floors and faded signs. He was round-bellied, loud and kind, in the way people are kind when they've lived through enough winters to stop pretending life is about anything other than holding each other up. He called me one evening, years after Tom's passing. "Helen," he said, "I'm buying a plot of land just outside town. Developers are sniffing around that area. You want in dirt cheap, pure gamble." I laughed. "Dirt cheap for you or dirt cheap for a teacher?" "A teacher's dirt cheap," he promised. And he kept his word. The land was nothing, just a muddy stretch with a broken fence and a rusted tractor sinking slowly into the earth. But something in me said yes. Maybe hope, maybe desperation. Maybe the training of a woman who had learned to make soup out of bones and joy out of scraps. I paid for my share using savings Tom and I had set aside for a vacation we never got to take. That single act, one tiny unlikely gamble, shaped the next 40 years of my life. As the years passed, I bought another small plot, then another. Nothing glamorous, just neglected land people sold because they believed it would never be worth anything. But land, like people, changes with time if you give it patience instead of judgment. Some plots remained worthless. Some tripled in value. A few became something more, far more. Still, I stayed in my little brown house, the one everyone seemed so eager for me to sell now. Its floors creaked like old bones. The furnace rattled every winter. But its walls held laughter and tears, and every time Daniel came home from college, he hugged me in the doorway as if he'd been holding his breath while he was away. He never knew how hard I worked, not really. He saw my homemade lunches, my patched clothes, my coupons, the way I simmered soup for 3 nights in a row. He thought I was frugal, because I had to be, not because I chose to be. And I let him believe that. A child shouldn't carry the weight of adult finances, not when he already carried the weight of losing a father. I taught full-time, tutored part-time, and spent late nights researching property taxes and lease agreements with a dictionary at my elbow. I learned to read contracts the way I once read children's essays carefully, with a pencil between my fingers and a habit of underlining anything that felt like a lie. By the time I turned 55, my hair had silvered at the temples, and the district gave me a plaque for 30 years of dedicated service. I smiled for the picture shaking hands with people who had no idea that the land beneath their own office building was part of an investment group I belonged to. But I didn't care about recognition. Never did. I cared that Daniel was building a life of his own. I cared that I could help quietly without him ever feeling like he owed me anything. When he married Olivia, I welcomed her with open arms. She was bright, ambitious, confident, everything I hoped for in someone who would stand beside my son. But the first time she visited my house, she said softly, "It's quaint the way people say it's moldy, but want to be polite." Shortly after moving in with her parents temporarily, Daniel began speaking differently, not cruelly, just carefully. "Mom, the neighborhood's getting rough. Maybe you should think about selling. Mom, Olivia's parents know a great financial planner. He could help you. Simplify things. Mom, maybe you should look at senior living communities. Just options, you know." Options, a gentle word for being put away. I didn't hold it against him. Influence is a powerful thing, especially when wrapped in good intentions. Still, I stayed quiet. Quiet when they judged my house. Quiet when they assumed I scraped by on a teacher's pension. Quiet when they acted like helping me would be charity. Quiet until the night at Rowan and Finch when their whispers echoed louder than the clink of their glasses. Little did they know the truth they would hear soon, truth heavy enough to shift the ground beneath their feet. Because sometimes the smallest, quietest woman in the room is the one who holds the deed to the room itself. Before the night at Rowan and Finch, before the whispers, the pitying glances, the comment about letting me just sit quietly, there were signs. Small ones. Easy to ignore at first. People like Carol and Richard Hayes rarely show their hand outright. They test you first. They measure. They rank. They decide where you belong long before you've even taken a seat at their table. And thinking back, their judgment didn't begin at the restaurant. It began the very first day we met. Daniel had called a week earlier. "Mom, Olivia's parents want to meet you. How about Sunday dinner? We'll come to your place." I felt a tiny flutter of nerves. Not fear, just the natural unease of knowing my little boy was about to merge his life with another family. That Sunday, I made pot roast the way Tom used to, with thyme, onion, and just enough vinegar to sharpen the flavor. The house smelled warm, lived in, comforting. I polished the table, straightened the old framed school pictures of Daniel, and set out my mismatched plates, one chipped, one floral, one plain. They never bothered me. Life isn't symmetrical, why should dishes be? At 5 p.m., a sleek SUV pulled up in front of my modest brown house. I wiped my hands on my apron and checked my reflection. Just me. Always just me. And that had been enough for most of my life. Carol stepped in first, carrying lilies wrapped in paper from the expensive florist downtown. Her smile was polite, but her eyes took inventory. The sagging sofa, the scuffed floor, the lamp with tape on one leg, the old TV. She nodded once as if confirming something she already suspected. "Oh, she said it's cozy." Cozy, the word people use when they don't want to say small. Richard followed with a firm handshake and a faint frown as he looked around. He smelled like cologne and certainty. "Nice neighborhood," he said. "It used to be up and coming." Daniel hugged me tightly, so tightly I felt his heart pounding. But he pulled away quicker than normal, like he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of them. "Mom made her famous pot roast," he said brightly. "Better than any restaurant." Olivia kissed my cheek. "Hi, Helen. Sorry we're late. Dad likes taking the scenic route." I wasn't sure there was a scenic route into a neighborhood like mine, but I let it pass. We sat for coffee before dinner. I served theirs in my old mugs, the ones with faint stains that never fully washed out. Carol held hers like it might stain her fingers. Richard didn't drink at all. So Helen Carroll began leg-crossed elegantly. "Daniel tells us you taught school for years." 40 years, I replied, 4th grade. "How lovely," she said. "Bless your heart. The pay isn't great, of course, but teaching is meaningful." Richard chuckled. "Definitely not a career for getting ahead financially." I let their words settle like dust. I managed, I said simply. Managed. They didn't know that managing meant more than surviving. They didn't know about the land, the partnerships, the quiet wealth built on patience and midnight studying. But that was the point they didn't ask. People who judge quickly rarely do. During dinner, they spoke of Italy, Greece, Napa Valley, high-end restaurants, private tastings, crooked terraces overlooking blue water. They named wines like they were acquaintances. "What about you?" Helen Richard asked. "Do you travel much?" "I stay close to home," I said. "Raising Daniel kept me busy." Carol smiled sympathetically. "Well, perhaps now that you're retired, you could join a senior group. They plan nice little trips for older folks. Cruises, simple outings. Very managed. Very safe." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Mom's very independent." "For now," Carol said lightly. "But aging catches up to everyone. Better to make a plan than end up stuck." Stuck. So that was how she saw my life, a trap. A cage I'd accidentally wandered into. Not a choice. After dinner, as I washed dishes alone in the kitchen, I heard Richard whisper to Daniel in the living room. "She'll need help soon. You might want to prepare. Maybe sell the house eventually. It's old, and frankly, the equity could be better used." Carol added softly, "We'll guide you both. It's a lot of responsibility to manage an aging parent, especially one without savings." Without savings. They said it with such confidence, such certainty, like my life could be summarized by these mismatched plates and this old stove. I dried my hands and stepped into the living room. They all fell silent. It wasn't what they said. It was what they assumed. Later that night, after they left and the house returned to its quiet rhythm, I walked to the desk in the corner. I opened the top drawer. Inside was a worn manila folder, edges soft from decades of handling. I pulled out the stack of land deeds, partnership contracts, dividends, a portfolio thicker than any of them could imagine. The deed on top was to the early parcel that eventually became the Rowan and Finch development, the very restaurant where they would later whisper about me. My name sat beside the words majority owner. I let my fingers rest on it. They saw an old coat, mismatched dishes, a house that hadn't seen new paint in 10 years. They saw a woman surviving not one building an empire quietly beneath their feet. But I had learned long ago that real power doesn't shout. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't impress its way into a room. Real power waits, and when the time comes, it speaks exactly once and everyone hears it. They hadn't heard it yet, but soon, very soon, they would. By the time the night at Rowan and Finch finally arrived, I had already learned everything I needed to know about the Hayes family. Their tone, their glances, their careful, polite cruelty wrapped in silk and silverware. But nothing prepared me for how far they were willing to go. The evening began with a cold wind cutting down Main Street, slipping under my old brown coat as I stepped out of the cab. Rowan and Finch glowed like a jewel, warm lights, tall windows, people slipping in with confidence and cards that never declined. It was the kind of place that sold comfort at a markup and dignity for the price of a mortgage payment. Inside, the maitre d' smiled at me the way people smile at someone they think is lost. "Reservation?" he asked gently. "Yes," I said, under haze. His brows lifted just slightly, one of those tiny tells people don't know they reveal. "Oh, right this way." He ushered me through rows of tables draped in white linen, crystal glasses, wine so dark it looked black, a place where no one raised their voice because the room itself commanded quiet admiration. And there near the far window sat my little circle of judgment. Daniel stood first, too quickly, too guiltily. "Mom, you made it." Olivia smiled at me, soft but strained. "Hi, Helen." Then came the parents. Carol in a pearl-covered blouse, her hair swept into an elegant knot. Richard in a navy suit and a watch that glinted every time he moved his hand. They both looked at me, then at my coat, then at each other. Carol rose halfway. "Oh, Helen, you're right on time." Her smile was thin as paper. I reached for the chair next to Daniel, but Carol lightly touched Olivia's arm and leaned toward her. Not loudly, but not quietly enough. "Let her sit quietly," she whispered. "She's probably tired. Probably tired, probably overwhelmed, probably out of place." The kind of assumption that sits on the table like a stain no one wipes up. I took my seat without commenting. The waiter arrived immediately. He offered wine lists heavy as encyclopedias to everyone except me. I noticed. Everyone noticed. No one said anything. Carol gently placed her hand on the menu and said to the waiter, "We'll order for her," then smiled at me as if she'd done me a kindness. Richard chuckled. "Some of these dishes can be complicated for people who haven't been here before." Daniel shifted in his seat. "Mom can order for herself." "Oh, honey," Carol said, patting his arm, "it's fine. We're just helping." Helping. These people loved the word help. Helping meant you're beneath us. Helping meant you can't be trusted with your own choices. Helping meant stay small so we feel big. I said nothing. The waiter returned with a bottle of wine the color of burgundy velvet. Carol tapped the stem of her glass and began recounting her latest trip to the French countryside, how she and Richard had tasted wines that would ruin all others. Richard told a story about a business partner who didn't understand the world of high-end investments. He laughed and shook his head as if remembering an adorable but foolish child. Every few minutes, Carol glanced at my coat, the old brown one I'd worn for 20 years, the one with the stitching on the sleeve and the soft wool lining. I had brought it intentionally. Let them underestimate me. Let them reveal themselves. Daniel tried to bring me into the conversation. Mom used to make her own wine in the 90s. Remember Mom, the blackberry one? Before I could answer, Carol said sweetly, "Oh, Daniel, that's adorable." Adorable. That word landed like a slap. Dinner arrived, delicate, tiny portions arranged like artwork. Carol had ordered the cheapest entree on the menu. For me. Not because she cared about my comfort, but because she assumed I couldn't afford to pay for anything else. She leaned over. "I know the prices here can be overwhelming. It's better to keep things simple." My stomach tightened, not with embarrassment, but with something colder, rising, building, waiting. Daniel reached beneath the table and gently squeezed my hand. It was the smallest gesture, but it told me everything. He felt the shift. He sensed the storm brewing behind my quiet eyes. The conversation at the table flowed like expensive wine, smooth but artificial. Olivia got promoted again. Our beach house is being remodeled. Richard closed another deal. Europe is so different. You can't understand it unless you've traveled extensively. Through it all, they rarely looked at me. Not really. They looked over me, past me, through me. Finally, dessert arrived. A plate with edible gold flakes, $38 for something that could fit in the palm of a child's hand. Carol sighed dreamily. "Isn't this lovely? When you live at a certain level, you appreciate quality. Not everyone does." She said it looking directly at my coat. Daniel inhaled sharply. "Mom." I touched his arm gently. "It's fine," I said, but my voice was no longer soft, no longer quiet. Carol blinked. Something in my tone made her sit straighter. "Helen, is everything okay?" I folded my napkin carefully and placed it beside my plate. "Carol," I said calmly, "I appreciate the hospitality and all the assumptions that came with it." Her smile faltered. "Assumptions? Oh no, we were just trying to help me," I finished. "Yes, I know." Richard scratched his temple. "Well, yes, it's natural to help someone who might need a little support." "A little support," I repeated. "Like ordering my meal because you assumed I couldn't read the prices, or deciding I should take quiet little senior trips when I retire, or whispering that I should sit quietly because you thought I'd embarrass you." Carol froze. Daniel looked at his hands. Olivia bit her lip. "What are you saying?" Carol whispered. "We didn't mean." "Oh, I know you didn't mean harm," I said. "You meant judgment. There's a difference." Richard leaned back. "Now hold on." I reached into my coat pocket, my old coat, the one they'd spent the whole night silently mocking. And I placed a folded document on the table. The heading glinted under the restaurant lights. Rowan and Finch Development Agreement. Majority landowner Helen Marlowe. Carol's mouth parted slightly. Richard's jaw tightened. Daniel stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. I looked at all of them. "You assumed I was poor," I said quietly, "but I'm not the one sitting at a table owned by the woman you just tried to belittle." Silence swallowed the room. Every smile died. And it was only the beginning. The silence that followed my words didn't feel like silence at all. It felt like a collapse, soft, sudden, unmistakable. Carol's eyes darted to the document as if it might burn her fingertips. Richard leaned forward, squinting, reading twice, then a third time, his nostrils flaring with each line. Olivia froze completely, and Daniel, my sweet boy, stared at me with a confusion so raw it almost softened me. Almost. Carol finally found her voice, first thin and trembling. "Hey, Helen, I don't understand. What is this?" "It's what it looks like," I answered. "Proof that the land this restaurant sits on the land your friends brag about dining atop belongs to me." Richard frowned sharply. "That's impossible. The developers would never sell land like this to someone like me," I finished. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. I watched the realization wash over them like cold rain dripping slowly into the cracks of their self-assurance. Their world depended on categories: people who had and people who didn't, people who earned respect and people who were expected to sit quietly at the table they paid for. I had just broken their system. Carol swallowed hard. "Helen, why didn't you say anything? Why pretend? Why come in that coat?" "This coat," I touched the worn fabric lightly. "This coat has taken me through more winters than you've lived in this state. I wore it because it's warm, not because it's poor." "But you let us believe," she stammered. "No," I corrected gently but firmly. "I let you show me who you are when you believed." The waiter hovered nearby, watching the unfolding disaster with wide, fascinated eyes. I gave him a reassuring nod. He vanished instantly. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Helen, if this is true, which seems highly unlikely, why would you hide something like that?" "I didn't hide anything," I said. "I lived simply. You mistook simplicity for lack." He said nothing. "People like you," I continued, "think wealth is loud, that it announces itself with watches and wine and vacations. But real wealth, hard-earned wealth, rarely needs to be seen." Carol's perfectly manicured fingers curled against the tablecloth. "Well, you could have mentioned it." "And what would you have done?" I asked calmly. "Treated me with respect, invited me closer. Used your inside voice instead of whispering, 'Just let her sit quietly,' the moment I arrived." Carol paled. I didn't mean that," she whispered weakly. "It was just an expression." "No," I said. "It was a verdict." Olivia finally spoke. "Mom, Dad, please stop talking." But Carol wasn't done. "Helen, you blindsided us," she insisted, her voice rising with each word. "We were trying to help. We thought Daniel might someday have to. To take care of me," I finished. "To carry me. To send me on senior trips so I wouldn't be alone. To manage my finances." "That's not what I—" "That is exactly what you meant, Carol." Her lips trembled. "Well, excuse us for caring." I leaned forward, folding my hands gently. "Caring isn't the problem. Your version of caring is." Richard exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "So what now? You expect us to— what, apologize because we didn't know you were wealthy?" "No," I said softly. "I expect you to apologize because you treated me like I was less." Richard looked away, jaw clenched tight. And then Daniel spoke, his voice small but steady. "Mom, why didn't you tell me?" That question pierced deeper than all the others combined. I turned to him, my heart softening instantly. "Because you didn't need to know, sweetheart. Because I wanted you to build your life by your own hands, not mine. Because your father would have wanted you to trust yourself, not rely on my safety net." He blinked hard. "Did you think I'd treat you differently?" "No," I whispered. "I thought others would treat you differently if they knew about me, and I wanted you to choose your people without money clouding the truth." Olivia covered her mouth. Her voice cracked. "Helen, I'm so sorry. I didn't know my parents. You knew, I said gently. You just weren't ready to confront it. She nodded slowly, ashamed. Then Carol leaned back, crossing her arms as if preparing to reclaim the high ground. Well, Helen, congratulations. You fooled us. You had your moment. I hope it was satisfying. I looked her in the eyes. It wasn't satisfying. It was necessary. Necessary, she scoffed. Yes, because tonight proved exactly what I feared. You only treat people well when you think they're your equal. Richard scoffed. That's not fair. It's honest, I replied. Carol's eyes glistened, not with sorrow, but with anger. You made us look shallow. You made yourselves look shallow, I said. I just sat here in my coat. The weight of the words settled like a stone between us. Olivia finally whispered, Mom. Dad, please stop. But it was too late. The truth had already taken its seat at the table. The waiter returned with the check placed in front of Richard out of habit. Richard attempted to hand over his card with forced dignity. I didn't speak. I didn't move. I simply watched. And when the waiter returned, blinking confused, clearing his throat, I already knew what he would say. I'm sorry, sir, but your card was declined. Carol's head snapped toward him. That's impossible. The waiter blushed. I tried twice. Richard's face reddened. It's a bank error. It has to be. The waiter nodded politely. I understand. Do you have another form of payment? Richard fumbled inside his wallet, his hands shaking. Carol whispered, just try the gold card. Try it. And there, watching two people who had judged me for an entire lifetime struggle with a momentary inconvenience, I felt no spite. Just clarity. The world had a strange sense of balance sometimes. Not punishment, not revenge, just balance. I reached quietly, calmly into my coat. But this time not for a document. For a different card entirely. I placed it on the table. A heavy, sleek, unmistakable card. The room shifted. Carol stared. Richard froze. Olivia gasped softly. Daniel looked at me as if a new universe had opened. I tapped it gently with my finger. Dinner, I said, is on me. The table felt different after the card landed, like the gravity in the room had shifted. Even the chandelier above seemed to hum quieter, as if listening. Carol stared at the card as though it were a foreign object, a relic dug up from ruins she didn't know how to interpret. Richard kept his jaw-tight eyes fixed on the tablecloth instead of me. The waiter took the Centurion card with both hands carefully, reverently, and disappeared. Silence swelled between us again, but this silence wasn't like the earlier one. The earlier silence was built on judgment. This one was built on exposure. Daniel was the first to speak. Mom, he whispered, voice tight. I had no idea you were involved in something this big, in any of this. I know, I said softly. That was the point. His brow furrowed. But why carry all that alone? Why not tell me? At least I could have helped. I could have. You were a child when I started, I interrupted gently. And later, when you grew up, you were building your own life. I didn't want my money or lack of it shaping your choices. I wanted you to choose your people because of who they were, not what they offered. He swallowed hard as though realizing what that implied. I watched his eyes flick to Olivia's parents. Carol stiffened. Now wait. But Daniel lifted a hand. Mom, did you think I'd judge you too? No, I said. I thought the world around you might. He exhaled shakily. I feel like I failed you. You haven't, I said quickly. I didn't tell you because I wanted your life to be yours, not mine. I wanted you to fight for your success instead of inheriting mine. You earned everything you have. That's worth more than any check I could have written. Carol muttered. Some of us prefer transparency in families. I turned to her steady. Transparency is honest. Judgment is not. You offered the second while expecting the first. Carol flushed crimson. Richard finally spoke, his tone tight but controlled. Look, Helen, tonight has clearly gone sideways. But you must understand people make assumptions all the time. You made one too. You assumed we were malicious. We weren't. We're protective of Olivia. That's natural. Yes, I agreed. Protection is natural. Superiority is not. His nostrils flared. And if we're being honest, I continued, you weren't protecting Olivia. You were protecting your image. Carol scoffed. That's ridiculous. Is it? I asked calmly. You worried about what it would look like if your daughter married the son of a woman you believed to be struggling. You thought my life might reflect badly on yours. And you showed that in every word you chose tonight. Carol clenched her napkin. You're twisting this. No, Olivia said quietly. Her parents turned. Olivia was pale, but her voice was steady. No, Mom. She's not. I heard everything tonight. I saw the way you spoke to her, the way you watched her coat, the way you tried to control the conversation. You didn't treat her like Daniel's mother. You treated her like a problem. Carol gaped at her daughter. Olivia, how can you say that everything your father and I have done, every sacrifice has been for you, for your future? Olivia's voice cracked. Then why does my future only matter if it looks exactly like yours? Richard's shoulders stiffened. This is not the place. This is exactly the place, Olivia whispered. I studied her, the way her hands trembled, the way her eyes shone. She was fighting something much bigger than tonight. She was fighting years of being molded into an extension of her parents. And she was finally breaking free. Mom, she said softly, do you want to know what hurts me the most? Not that you misjudged Helen. Not even that you embarrassed me tonight. It's that you've been doing this my whole life. To me, to everyone. I'm exhausted. Carol shut her eyes tightly as if Olivia's words were too bright to look at directly. Sweetheart, please. No, Olivia whispered. I'm not a project. I'm not an investment. I'm your daughter. And I love Daniel. I love him for who he is, not for who he might impress. Daniel leaned toward her eyes, softening. Live. She wiped her cheek. I want a marriage that isn't built on performance. I want us to be real, not perfect, just real. Something in me warmed, a small fragile thread of hope. Carol's gaze hardened suddenly. So what? You want us to applaud this woman for hiding her wealth, for tricking us, for making fools out of us. She didn't make you fools, Olivia whispered. You did that on your own. Richard's jaw twitched. We won't sit here and be insulted. I folded my hands. No one is insulting you, Richard. We're holding up a mirror. What you choose to see is your decision. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Just then, the waiter returned, placing my card and receipt on the table. All set, Ms. Marlowe. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening. His tone had shifted. Respectful. Warm. Not because of the card, but because he'd seen everything. People underestimate waitstaff, forgetting they are the quiet witnesses of every human truth. I slid the card back into my coat pocket. When I looked up, Carol's eyes were glassy, but not with remorse, with humiliation. This isn't over, she said quietly. You embarrassed us. You blindsided us. And we are family now, whether we like it or not. I didn't embarrass you, I replied softly. I simply didn't protect you from the consequences of your own behavior. Carol stiffened as if struck. Olivia covered her face with her hands. Mom, please stop. But Carol wouldn't. We welcomed your son. We supported your son. And this is how you repay us. I looked at her. Really looked. Under the diamonds, the perfect hair, the carefully maintained facade, there was fear. Deep, bone-deep fear of losing control, of losing her daughter, of being wrong. I didn't come tonight to destroy anything I said quietly. I came to sit at the same table as everyone else. Daniel's voice was hoarse. And they wouldn't let you. No, I whispered. They wouldn't. He reached for my hand and squeezed it firm, protective, different than before. And in that moment, I knew something had shifted inside him too. Families don't break in one night, but sometimes they begin healing in one. We left the restaurant in 3 different directions. Carol and Richard stormed out first, walking so fast the maitre d' had to step aside. Carol's heels clicked like tiny hammer strikes against the marble floor. Richard muttered something under his breath about respect and boundaries, though no one was around to listen. Olivia followed them out a minute later, shoulders trembling, her face pale from holding back tears. Daniel hesitated, torn between comforting her and staying with me. "Go," I told him gently. "She needs you right now." "But Mom—" "Go," I repeated, squeezing his arm. "She's fighting a battle I can't fight for her." He nodded, kissed my forehead, and hurried after his wife. When the doors of Rowan and Finch closed behind them, I found myself standing alone just outside the entrance. The night air was crisp, brushing against my old coat, like a familiar friend. For a moment, I simply breathed slowly, deeply, letting the silence settle after the storm. I had expected anger. I had even expected confrontation. But I hadn't expected the ache in my chest afterward, not grief, not guilt. Something else. Relief, perhaps. Or the weight of 40 years finally exhaled. I walked a little ways down the block, letting the city's nighttime hum wash over me. Streetlights cast warm circles on the sidewalk. A couple laughed as they passed. A bus rumbled by in the distance. Life continued indifferent to human drama. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Mom. I turned. Daniel stood there, breathless, uncertain-looking, more like the boy I raised, and less like the polished man who had walked into that restaurant earlier. "Where's Olivia?" I asked. "She's talking to her parents," he said, "or trying to. I needed to talk to you first." I nodded and waited. He stepped closer. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I shook my head gently. "No, Daniel, you didn't do anything wrong." I didn't stop them. "You weren't meant to," I said softly. "You were meant to learn who they are and who you are." He looked down, shame tugging at his shoulders. "I heard every word they said tonight. I saw every look they gave you, and I let it happen because I didn't want to cause trouble. I didn't want to upset Olivia." "That's love," I said. "But love doesn't mean silence. You can love someone and still tell them when they're wrong." He took a shaky breath. "I should have defended you." "You did," I said, smiling softly. "In the end, you did, and that's what matters." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I feel like I failed you." "Daniel." I whispered, touching his cheek the way I used to when he was small. "You didn't fail me. You grew tonight. You saw the truth, and you stood with me when it mattered." His eyes glistened. "Why didn't you tell me about the land, about the money, about everything?" I smiled at the question that had been waiting years to be asked. "Because wealth isn't a personality, sweetheart. It's a tool, and I didn't want it shaping the man you'd become." He breathed out slow and heavy. "I get it now." "I hoped you would," I said. A moment later, Olivia appeared at the corner of the street alone. Her shoulders were trembling, and she wiped her eyes as she walked toward us. "Liv," Daniel said, stepping toward her. But she shook her head gently. "No, let me say this first." She turned to me, eyes full of exhaustion and clarity. "Helen." "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. "I'm sorry for what my parents said. I'm sorry for not defending you sooner. I'm sorry for all of it." I stepped closer and placed a hand on her arm. "Olivia, apology isn't a sentence. It's a beginning. What matters is what you do next." She nodded, swallowing hard. "My parents left," she said quietly. "They're furious. They said you manipulated us, that you humiliated them. They said, they don't know who I am anymore." "And do you?" I asked. She blinked, startled. "Do you know who you are, Olivia, apart from them? Apart from expectation? Apart from image?" Her breath hitched. "I think," she whispered, "I'm starting to." I gave her arm a gentle squeeze. "That's enough for now." Daniel looked between us, relief softening his face. Then Olivia stepped closer. "I want to build a life with Daniel," she said. "A real one. Not one that looks perfect from the outside, one that feels honest on the inside. You showed me what honesty looks like." I nodded. "Then build it," I said, "together. Not around anyone else's standards, not even mine, just yours." She wiped her cheeks and managed a trembling smile. "Will you Still be part of our life, she whispered. Of course, I said. But understand this, I won't shrink myself to make other people comfortable ever again. Daniel exhaled. I don't want you to. A breeze passed between us, cool and tender. Olivia looked up. My parents may not come around for a long time. That's their journey, I said. Yours is choosing what kind of person and partner you want to be. She nodded slowly. I choose better. Daniel slipped his arm around her, and I choose you both. We stood there a moment, 3 people in a quiet city street surrounded by the glow of street lights and the sharp clarity that comes after telling the truth. Finally, I turned to my son and daughter-in-law. You two go home, I said with a smile. You have a lot to talk about. Daniel hesitated. Are you sure? I nodded. I've walked home alone from much harder nights than this. He hugged me tight longer than he had in years. We love you, Mom. I love you both, I whispered. When they left, I stood for a moment longer, breathing, thinking, feeling the strange, sweet lightness of a burden finally set down. I walked home under a quiet sky, the city humming softly around me, and for the first time in a long time, I felt completely at peace with my past, with my choices, with my truth. Some people lose everything in a single night, but sometimes you gain clarity, you gain honesty, you gain yourself. And that to me is wealth. If this story touched your heart even a little, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Tell me your city in the comments, your stories, your thoughts, your reflections. If you'd like to walk this journey with me, don't forget to subscribe. There are so many more stories waiting for you. Let's continue together.